this is the Agri-Food panel. Welcome. My name is Mark Durno. Thank you very much for joining us today on the panel. I'm the managing partner at a fund called Rockstart Agri-Food. We invest in agri-tech and food tech companies, so I'm coming at this from an investment perspective, but I also have a background in farming. I have been a farmer. I still consider myself to be a farmer, and entrepreneurship as well. As you can see, I'm calling in from my living room at home, and it's been 8 weeks since I've had a haircut, so apologies to anybody out there who's expecting something better to look at. I'm going to, in a moment, go through and allow the panel to introduce themselves. Before I do, maybe just to set some context in terms of the industry that we're talking about. The agri-food industry is the largest industry on our planet. Everybody eats, I hope. If you don't eat, then you've got some serious problems coming your way very soon. And given that we are an ever-expanding population, it's also an industry that's under immense pressure, especially in the coming 20 to 30 years. So we're talking about having a 56% increase in food demand, which is over 7 trillion more calories that need to be produced per year. We're talking about having 500 million hectares more farmland required to feed all those people, which is about twice the size of India, for context. And we're also talking about an industry which is contributing around about 3/4 of all of the greenhouse emissions that we need to reduce if we're going to be able to hit our climate goals. So a massive topic, a massive opportunity, and today we've got some really talented entrepreneurs who are going to be talking about how they are helping combat a better future for our food supply system. And maybe if we just take it from my screen to the right, Philipp, do you want to introduce yourself and the company that you're working at and what it is that you're trying to do?
Sure, thank you so much for having me. My name is Philipp, and I'm one of the co-founders at Rebelmeat. I actually started a food e-commerce startup before, back in 2012. And back then I promised myself to never go back into the food industry again, because it's such a difficult industry. But, and I spent actually a couple of years away in tech, in more digital technology, when I worked on the other side as an investor. But I somehow fell in love again with especially the alternative protein sector, and that's why we're now back in the game with what we believe is a new category inside alternative protein. So what we do is we do blended meat products. So we do products that consist of 50% out of meat and 50% plant-based ingredients. And we think that's important because there's still the vast majority of all products out there sold, for example, be it burger patties or wherever, is still meat-based, and only a tiny fraction is vegan. So we think there's got to be a new category, and that can gain a bigger market share probably than vegan products can, and therefore basically support the transition in the agri-food system short term, and also be a key enabler for example, cultivated meat in the long term. But we'll probably get to that point later. So thank you.
Thank you, Philipp. Sorosh, you're next on my screen.
All right. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Sorosh Tavakoli. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Noquo Foods. We are developing a plant-based cheese, and we are based in Stockholm. This is my second company. I've started, ran, and sold a software business in the past, and I am very naive in this amazing industry of full of opportunities, Philipp. Not been bruised yet with all the challenges. I happily unaware of what is facing us. But we are, we're very much, Noquo Foods is all about reinventing our favorite foods, and it comes, as Mark set out in the beginning, we have to transition our entire societies in terms of carbon footprint and many other things in terms of environmental footprint. Huge part of that comes down to the animal-based food industry, and I think everybody can agree that we have to reduce the amount of animal-based products that we eat, and then that comes down to the number and the quality of the alternatives available to us. And as you look at different categories, we can see milk, for example, has a pretty good pretty good alternatives, and we're seeing that shift happening. But the cheese category, which we are very focused on at the moment, very much lacks that. So we're hopefully soft launching in September. So we're now fine tuning our prototypes, our first prototypes, which is the feta-like cheese product. But I'll leave it at that and pass it over to one of our investors, Ali.
Who will take herself off mute. Thank you, Sorosh. We, to be transparent, are investors to our great luck in Sorosh and his great team at Noquo, and Alain, who we can now see at Ynsect. For those that attended the last panel, you'll have heard far more than enough from me. We invest where tech meets nature. We look to invest from soil health to gut health. And from a protein transition standpoint, we look to bring nature's best to bear on the health of people and the health of planet in the products that emerge from that, and founders who have that vision and alignment.
Thanks, Ali. Nikita, you're next on my screen. Do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. Yes, pleasure to be on the panel. Thank you. My name is Nikita. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Agranimo. And at Agranimo, we provide plot level, very micro climate adaptation tools for farmers and for food supply chains, particularly focusing on the fresh produce, so fruits and vegetables. So we'll look at detailed soil and climate data, and we transform it into indices that help manage farms more efficiently and more sustainably and help plan the rest of the supply chain. I'll be focusing a lot on fruits and vegetables today.
Super. Thanks, Nikita.
Thank you.
We lost Philipp. I'm sure he'll jump back on in a moment. Alain, do you want to introduce yourself and Ynsect? And then also, maybe we can get this conversation started because a couple of the guys are having technical hitches coming in. After you've finished giving an introduction, let us know, so what would you say we need to do, or how would you, if you were to be able to build a protein supply system from scratch, what would that look like for the future? I'll let you run straight into the conversation with it.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm Alain Revah. I'm the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Ynsect. And I also came from a tech background like Sorosh, and I was just looking for a real moonshot to basically launch and grow and hopefully get to the finish line. And I started being an advisor to the company for about 4 years, and then a small investor, and then the company grew and just completed all these different milestones that Philipp was speaking about the food industry, which is the regulatory aspects and all the research in order to actually prove what we were claiming in terms of the new protein, and now we have one plant up and running 2 hours south of Paris, and then we're building the largest plant in the world in north of Paris, about an hour north of Paris. Ynsect, harvests a natural protein of an insect called a mealworm. It has incredible properties, 76% protein, less than 2% anti-nutrients, and it basically increases the yield of aquafarms and improves the health of all sorts of animals, including pet food or pets in the pet food industry, and also we're looking at human health and human nutrition as a future market. So you asked about what would be the framework, right?
Yeah. If we had to start from scratch, right? Say COVID wipes out everything that we've set up in the last 1,000 years in terms of what we know about food.
So
what would you do?
Two things happened, to us. I mean, we were declared an essential business. So all of a sudden we couldn't shut down, and we were up and running, and the plant was up and running. So that actually is something that was a novelty for us. I think the other thing that happened was that borders went up in 2 seconds, and all of a sudden food sovereignty and food independence became like a really big key. Do I need to import? What am I missing in my food chain to be able to grow and address my my food needs? And so I think those two things became really, really crucial for us. But I also think that what's really happening is a very clear focus now on climate change and on unsustainable business practices, which we just can't continue in the way that we did. So I think the public is way more interested now into what they can do for themselves, what they can do for others and the environment in how they eat. And so what's interesting there for us is that both the regulatory framework has accelerated and consumer adoption is now something that we think will be possible and way more active than it used to be in the past.
Okay. And maybe just so we're on the topic right now, just for those of you who have just either joined us or popping in and out of alternative proteins and what our protein sources are going to look like in the near future. And Alain has given us some insights on the regulatory and the border aspects of what COVID's doing. Sorosh, maybe you can explain to us why it matters or not to have livestock in.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it just on the, if we had a clean sheet, the problem is we don't have a clean sheet, which is why Philipp, for example, has to blend in 50%, and which is why I'm making something that is similar to cheese. And this is because obviously we have all these behaviors, these customs and the culture, and food is really a huge part of our identity. So we can't just come in and wipe all that away and kind of do it right. Now that said, I think it's a great question, because if you would ask the question differently and say, what if there was an alien who came down and said, tell me how you people are you humans, how are you living on this planet and what are you eating? And then to go about saying, well, we have all these, we're cutting down all these forests in Brazil, to grow soy. Then we have all these thousands of cows lined up next to each other, and then we put that soy on these ships, and then we take them there, and then we feed them here, and then we lose 80% of all this of all the calories in the process, and we end up with all this the pile of shit from all these cows. I mean, it's just like you could not explain what the hell we're doing. And I think that's kind of somewhat leading to also, I think, where we need to go. This is just not a sustainable system we've set up. And I mean, I don't know. The other question you ask also is interesting. Why does it matter? Like, does it matter that we have livestock? It kind of matters to the livestock that we have them, because we're kind of raising them to either milk them or kill them. I think that it matters to them, and there's I think what is it, 60 billion animals a year that we kind of slaughter. But it also matters for us, right, in terms of the amount of resources we have on the planet. It's very resource inefficient from calories, but also water, land use, all these things it's just irrational to use livestock, especially as we're going towards 10 billion people. So clearly that's the part I'm focused on. If we are able to shift behavior from these animal-based products towards plant-based products, right there we can just save so much. That's the lowest hanging fruit in a way, that and the food waste, right? We can just save so much doing that. Yeah. In order to do that, we need
example for fish, right?
Go ahead, Alain. We missed the start there. You're muted. You're
Alain, I think you got muted again somehow.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, perfect. So I think you can give the same example for the aquaculture and the fish industry. We're speaking about most fish farms being fed wild fish, so which is 90% human grade. And so you have all these, countries and companies who are just harvesting, wild fish, which is necessary for wild fish to feed. But then they actually crush it into a fish meal and then transport it all the way up north to actually these fish farms, and then basically feed it to farm fish, only to increase the number of fish available to actually feed, the planet. So it also, it also means that you can find, not necessarily proteins that, because these are massive industries. So, for better or worse, vegan cheese is not going to take over the industry. Just giving it a small space is already huge. And it's the same thing for us. Just letting us in and providing that protein to the aquaculture industry, which will reduce the stress on the fish stocks, which need that.
So, okay, so Alain and Sorosh, you're both working on solutions that remove livestock or animals from the loop in some way or another. Philipp, I'm obviously going to make a bridge to you with Rebelmeat because you've got 50% beef blend in your burgers, right? Can you share a little bit? What's the rationale there? These poor cows that Sorosh referred to. What's your strategy and the idea behind Rebelmeat?
Yeah, definitely. Also, maybe coming back to your first question, I think there is one thing that's really broken with the food industry, and start from scratch is one thing that we should change, and this is something that we really try to live and breathe at Rebelmeat, is transparency. Because besides the habits, we are like eating meat, for example, is very deeply ingrained. Like Sorosh also already said, it's very hard for people to eat less meat because it's deeply in most of our cultures and traditions and so on. And it's very hard for people to change. For example, we have in Western Europe, usually around 50% of people in surveys, they say they want to eat less meat next year, in such a question or a similar one. But actually, meat consumption is only decreasing very little, or in some countries even still increasing. So you can clearly see that people want to change their behavior, but it's very hard to do so in practice. And number two is the transparency bit, right? People often somehow, of course, know what's going on, but when they take the actual purchase decision, they're being tricked by clever marketing, or they just don't have the information, so they can trick themselves into thinking, it's actually not so bad what I'm buying. There was this nice story of an egg that was an actual egg that was put to a child as a present during Easter, and somehow it hatched and it was just thrown away. And some people found it. It was a big news story nationwide. Who could be so cruel to throw away a living egg, while at the same time every day millions of male chicken are killed? So it's just this whole transparency bit is really crazy. So what we're really trying to do is have basically a honest, transparent, and the most sustainable possible meat product out there. And so on the one hand, we try to use really the best meat available, so that is organically grown, a lot of focus on how the animals are brought up and slaughtered, and no soy from Brazil, etc. And on the other hand, of course, less meat. So by 50% less is better than 100%. And so putting these two components together, going forward, we can already save a lot. So that's our approach to this.
And I mean, you've got quite a number of people here who are advocating for that there won't be any livestock in the future, or at least towards that future. How do you see it, Philipp? Do you agree with that? What does it look like, the Rebelmeat burger in 5 or 10 years' time?
Yeah, I think it's still very hard to see if that's actually going to happen. But we're okay. Were you finished, Mark? The question? Sorry.
Yeah.
So okay. So I think it's still very hard to see, but we definitely believe that the food system as a whole will change and will have to be more sustainable. And one such approach could be cultivated meat that's grown in a bioreactor, or other sources of protein, maybe also obviously insects and many other sources of protein. And what we believe that blended meat can be a nice market entrance strategy for different kinds of alternative proteins, because it can act as a bridge for consumers, not to go all the way immediately, but change your habits slowly. And so we definitely see us as one potential market entrance channel for cultivated meat. That's why I think that blended meat is such an interesting opportunity.
Okay. So, sorry, go on, Sorosh. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I think the main challenge is in the actual product experience. I don't think people are that loyal to the actual meat itself or to the actual, animal the product comes from. People are quite loyal to the flavor, to the functionality, to the familiarity that they have towards these products. And also, as I said, the culture bit, the heritage, try removing the meatballs from IKEA or from Swedes. It's not going to happen. But we can replace them with more sustainable options, and that ends up being either a blend, or it ends up being something made of soy or something else over time, or maybe cultivated. But I think the problem so far has been most of these products just aren't good enough. But you can see that in the milk category, they are actually good enough, and in some ways they're actually better. And people might have tried. So people have been motivated by sustainability and by health, and sometimes by obviously allergies and let's say lactose and things like that. But then once they've switched, they then are now the main reason people drink plant-based milk is because of the flavor, the taste. So, and I think that is what in the US it's north of 13% now that's plant-based. Cheese is 0.25%, and I think meat is reaching about 1%. So there's still lots to be done there. But I think what's really exciting with right now is that people are actually really motivated to go and try, because that's the first barrier. You'll have to want to change, be curious. Otherwise, you just keep on doing the same. And then on the transparency thing, Philipp, I think also you notice people who switch in a way. The transparency is there more than you think. Then your eyes open up and you start seeing and seeing what was already there, but you didn't want to see it as you start shifting.
Yeah.
So
I think Sorosh and Philipp, that what's really happening when you start like an industrial company where there's going to be plants and there's going to be workers and it's going to be massive. At least in our case, we're speaking about 70,000 tons, that will be produced in our factory. You realize that you have this one shot to just do everything, from scratch and not necessarily reinvent the industry, but do it totally differently. So, we automated the plant. We actually have a complete different footprint on the land. We actually focus on the biodiversity around the plant and make sure that there's passages for wildlife and all sorts of different, contraptions to help birds, nest or avoid, the building. We did all sorts of different studies to use 98% less of the land, use 50% less resources, not just be carbon neutral, but be carbon negative. And reinvent all these processes, which are more expensive than traditional industry, but basically are a chance to be, of course, completely transparent and not genetically modifying anything, and obviously feeding the best quality feedstock to these animals. But the reality is, we're also trying to reinvent the way industry is done in accordance with the sustainability goals, and I think that's a huge privilege, and it's a great chance, that we've been given.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I ask Alain a question? Just on the just wondering, what's the feedstock that these mealworms eat?
eat a waste, a byproduct of the cereal industry. So wheat, corn, barley, anything that the husk, anything that these companies producing cornflakes or actually producing beer or ethanol plants, whatever waste they discard, this is what the insect eats. So what's really interesting about it is obviously it's eating the waste of another industry, but it's also generating no waste. So in our plant we have no waste because the insect produces the protein meal, but also the protein oil, and the dejections of the insect are actually one of the best fertilizers in the world. So we sell everything that actually is in the plant goes out, and there's absolutely no waste.
Great. That's fully circular, ultimately. Ali, I'm going to point the conversation towards you, and coming at it from an investor perspective. We've heard a lot of challenges that entrepreneurs and business are facing around regulatory, around how to be able to build these circular processes in. I haven't heard anything about price parity yet. Maybe that's an interesting one to touch upon, because we also have to live in the real world where people, consumers, make a pick based on price. For you, with the alternative proteins and the protein transition, what do you think the core factor is to win out at this one? And what's the trajectory? How far away are we from this being the norm? How far away are we from this, the alternative proteins having a significant chunk of the market?
I mean, the direct answer, if you're asking about COGS, which is, of course, the conversation in alternative protein of, are the cost of goods lower than conventional? Are you able to be at price parity from a product standpoint? As ever, I don't think you can look at that in isolation. The answer will always be at scale. You can get to a certain place, and there are certain metrics you can put to that to do justice to that hypothesis. And I think that's certainly what we see now. There's been an evolution in the companies in this space being able to justify or rationalize that perspective more than perhaps was true at the outset. Certainly in lab grown, there's a different conversation there, and that there are a lot more variables to play with. How you scale that technology is a cost in and of itself, never mind getting to per pound what that looks like. So I'll stick to the plant-based space. I think we're closer than we've ever been. Getting back to the conversation that Philipp and Sorosh and Alain all started related to livestock and the animal's role within the broader environment. I mean, we talk about regenerative agriculture for a very specific reason, which is we do believe that animals in the traditional sense that we mean them, as in four-legged cows marching around and otherwise, have a role within the ecosystem. And when you think about carbon sequestration, there's a reason for that, which is the way to get ruminants back into the soil is by virtue of animals marching around in soil and being able to put those nitrates and good, healthy soil food back into the soil. I say all of this for the sake of, I don't think you can isolate any one variable. Yes, of course, as investors, when you're looking at any product category, you have to. I mean, that becomes your margin, and that becomes whether or not it's a saleable proposition or not. I think the reality right now is the lion's share, and certainly all of the competitors in this space, are working off of commodity ingredients. So it's soy, it's pea, it's oat, all of which are commodified supply chains. And so you've got a lower cost of goods. The more challenging spaces are in the novel protein environments where you're having to originate a new source, as well as deal with all the technical ramifications that come with that. Things like microalgae, which Sorosh can take in a way that I will not do justice to, and Sorosh's Medium blogs, just to plug his past work, are testament to this. How do you deal with, never mind the realities of what you do with that ingredient to make it viable, things like off notes, functional utility, etc. But also you have to scale the supply chain. So I think we're much more acutely aware of that challenge, while also being acutely aware of the fact that creating products off of monoculture commodity chains doesn't do justice to our thesis either. So you're sort of between a rock and a hard place, with the caveat that I think the thesis against Impossible and beyond, the thesis against which they've scaled rather, is get consumer traction, create a brand and product that people love and consume, and iterate from there to make improvements and drive consumer adoption. And iterative change, like Alain was saying as well, little pieces that you're able to do cheese in and of itself will not exclusively change the world, but each little chunk that we create change against will be additive. So, I mean, when we look at this space, one of the areas of burgeoning interest, I think I mentioned it before, was mycelium and the mushroom area. Part of that is a product of having looked at soy and pea and otherwise, and the functional utility of those as different than mycelium creates an additive benefit to that, which is from a texture and structure standpoint, there's something quite new and closer to meat that you can work with from origin. Also, the way that it's grown, you can add to its feedstock to create flavor in a different way than soy and pea are typically used at this time, or at least those that are creating products off of them don't have control over that growing environment in a way that they can edit. So it's not an easy answer in the sense that there isn't one. If I had one, we'd have invested in it. That is a challenge, absolutely. But I think there's more transparency to the challenges in that space and much more evolution. And picks and shovels, I guess, in the sense that there are people working at all of the different pieces in that supply chain. You're seeing people who are exclusively focusing on the bioreactor challenge or the supply chain piece of it and doing the B2B ingredient piece. And then people who are productizing off of that. You're seeing many more, I guess, silos that are connected being created.
Yeah. Maybe I can play devil's advocate for a moment and speak on. Sorry, I can hear myself. Somebody's speaker. Sorry. Yeah, maybe I can play devil's advocate for a moment and speak on behalf of the existing protein industry, all those farmers out there who are rearing chickens and cows and caring dearly for them, and also speaking as somebody who was a livestock producer myself growing up and had a dairy farm growing up, and knowing the care that we put into our animals and the care that went into animal husbandry. There's a lot of criticism leveled towards the plant-based alternatives as actually being not that healthy. It's a lot of salt, a lot of processing. You don't really know what some of the binders that are being used are. Whereas if you get a steak, you know it's come from a cow that's ultimately been grass-fed on a hill somewhere and free-ranging, or free-range chicken, for example, who's been properly fed is going to be very healthy. What's the argument here to defend that accusation about the health component?
You're asking me?
Anybody who would like to put their hand up. Sorosh looks.
Well, I mean, I was going to toss it to Sorosh, but I mean, I'll lead him in simply to say, yes, I mean, that's where the conversations evolved too, right? It began with plant-based alternatives inherently healthier than meat. That was their competitive difference when they entered the market. There was an uptick then because meat became the new smoking as such. And so there was massive uptake in an interest in plant-based foods. However, 38 ingredients later, there are now conversations around how much coconut oil is in a healthy diet. Is that sustainable? Does that have positive environmental implications? How much sodium? So I think that is, and that is where Sorosh can talk about Noquo and some of the founding values behind what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's always customer comes first, right? So I think we cannot forget about the customer and try to give them what they want, right? And that is a challenging thing, because obviously we can see that malnutrition is a huge challenge now. I think it's a bigger challenge among people who eat too much food than people who don't eat enough food, right? So in a way, place where people are just not eating the food that's good for them overall, even before we enter the plant-based conversation. So that's a huge challenge, but I mean, I think it's a natural evolution. I think this first step was make something that's tasty. Second step will be, but why? By the way, what is it that I'm eating? It's not meat, but what is it? And then it's about health and natural, kind of that, healthy food that's natural. Now, nothing is freaking natural, right? So that's also very complex topic and very much of a perceived thing. Where we are right now with our product, at least, it's I think nutritionally very sound and I would say even more nutritious than animal-based cheese. But I'm not sure we can achieve the same outcome with a melting cheese, for example. This is a feta-like cheese where we've been able to achieve the characteristics and the flavor and all those things. I've actually been very much looking at the the craftsmanship around the cheese making that is a 10,000 year old craftsmanship, and lots of knowledge and techniques that have gone into that, and have been very much inspired by that as well, which we think also will be quite compelling for consumers. So it's kind of like using science to really understand the problem and really to understand the tools you're using, but then really trying to develop a natural process with processes we're used to, right? And that we think are natural, right? Beer feels very natural. Well, it's not, and many other food products that we eat. So I think eventually, let's say, I hope that eventually the consumers will move towards demanding also more nutritious products. But also, let's not put too much hope in them.
As always, it does
given
end up
where we are.
to being in the consumer's hands, and we're going to talk about that in a moment as well. I'm conscious of time. I want to leave a little bit of time to move away from biting into alternative proteins and talking about bites instead. Sorry, bad bridge towards conversation about digital. Obviously, you guys continue to weigh in on this conversation, but I realize that Nikita and Markus here are a little bit quiet, and there's good reason for that. That's because they're working on solutions that are bringing digital tools to the food supply system. Markus, you joined us a little bit late, and you've been very patient before I introduced you. So perhaps you want to say a couple of words about who you are and why you've been waiting there to talk about Miils to kick us off.
Yes, and sorry for that. I really had some issues connecting, but I'm here now, so everything is fine. And yes, thank you, Mark. I would like to tell you just a few words. Our company, Miils, is doing exactly what Sorosh was just commenting here. We try to tell people what is in their food, and we want to take these two aspects, both the environmental and the nutritional aspect into account, and we want to communicate this the way that people can actually understand it. And that means that you need to personalize this message, and you need to bring the information to the consumer at the moment when she is buying food, when she is there thinking about these different options, so that she can see the difference between, for example, plant-based alternative compared to the traditional protein source, for example. And we're doing this by ourselves. We have platforms where we sell food directly, and especially to certain segments like seniors in different parts in Europe, in the Nordics and Germany. And then we also offer a tool for retailers that can use this for their customers, so that they can actually tell them and guide them through the food buying process. And we see that this transparency that we can bring is a crucial thing in the future, because the consumers will require this, and we also need to let them know what are the differences between the different products, and this is that we can do. But this is in short what we do.
That's super. I'm going to hear a bit more about it with some targeted questions in a moment. First of all, thank you, Blas Jakobin, who's just put a question up on the chat. I am watching it. We'll come back to some of the chat questions at the end of this session to pick up on that. But first, Nikita, you're obviously working much closer to the farmer and in the field. Could you give us some insights for the audience, what's happening in the field and beyond post COVID-19? Because we've not spoken too much about COVID-19, but it has had an impact, of course, on the whole food supply system. And Agranimo sits across multiple stakeholders. So what's going on at the moment with the farmers?
Yeah, thanks for asking.
You're on mute.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect.
Yep,
yeah, I mean, I hope it doesn't, to be honest, I hope it doesn't stop the investment and the drive towards more sustainability in the world, and that it doesn't stop our focus on the food chain. In fact, I think it actually is highlighting more and more problems in the food chain, and hopefully will help us in the long term. I mean, the first things you see is that the distribution of food is quite bad, and we hear kind of alarming reports about additional 100 million people going into hunger because of COVID. I mean, there are different reasons to that, but I think that food distribution has always been a bit of a problem, and we're not experts in all of it, but at least part of it is because I believe because digitization and kind of careful planning in the industry hasn't been implemented too well. From our perspective, as Alain mentioned, we all of our customers have all been categorized as essential workers, so the industry has not stopped. They needed to find some workarounds, and some categories of the products that we work with have shot up tremendously. Some more obvious ones like lemons and apples, because people see them as more vitamin C, and being more kind of immune, better for immune systems. Some categories are struggling a bit, like strawberries, for example, because they're very, very perishable and are typically relying on kind of people walking into the store, picking up a small basket and eating it right kind of in the moment. And now people go to the supermarket a lot less frequently, but buy more. So this, and we see that from the producer perspective, because a lot of the producers who had relationships with supermarkets kind of had to redirect all of their supply of fruits and vegetables to the supermarkets. Supermarkets saw about a 30% increase in fresh produce sales, and so that had to be supported by the producers who were in the COVID situation, but and had to kind of adapt with distancing in the packing houses, distancing in terms of harvesting. So speaking to some of our clients, some of the larger clients, a lot of them saw increases in costs, about 20 to 30%, depending on the product category, due to kind of this reduced efficiency by introducing those measures. Nevertheless, the volumes have been going up, and all of them kind of continued working, and they were all very. Right now, we're in the sales season in one of the areas where we work in South America. And there's a lot of focus on digital tools right now, because people realize that not meeting in the field and kind of doing things remotely is great. Especially all of our customers who are using it right now are expanding it to other areas of their fields. That is kind of what we see. Yeah, and then in general, I think logistics were heavily impacted. We saw some first quarter results, particularly for a lot of the logistics companies, were down. Nevertheless, it's all restarting now, and we've been speaking to Maersk, for example. No one is particularly concerned that the volumes are not going to pick up during the year anyway, so there will be a rebound. And in general, I think governments have been doing a pretty good job in the European Union with the fresh produce corridor, and in general to kind of maintain the industry working. So that's more or less the assessment.
Can you share a couple of insights as well? Maybe, I mean, you're helping farmers and also other stakeholders to collect and manage data, right? You're trying to make it more accessible. What kind of challenges are we facing just now that might have helped, for example, the warehouses to be able to better plan their efficiency, or the logistics firms to be able to better forecast their utilization? What are the challenges that we have around data capture and utilization?
I mean, the main challenges in the field is, I believe, I mean, and I just kind of read a report about that as well. It's a bit of lack of training, obviously, lack of education around how to use data. But I also think it's a mistake of the providers of data, because they a lot of them didn't go far enough in the agriculture industry and sort of provided farmers essentially, or field managers within large companies, with these heaps of data, and did not really translate it into how do you use it and how do you make better decisions. So this is, I think, is the stopping factor. Another factor, of course, is the price point and kind of this lack of transparency of what your return on investment is in those data tools. And also from Agranimo's perspective, really uniquely our perspective is that we believe that the industry is not sharing the cost of utilizing digital tools. So we are, for example, focusing a lot of our attention on yield forecasting, which essentially can help logistical planning. So transport management systems can help retailers with planning their marketing campaigns and kind of reducing spoilage. And so all these areas rely on field data. And traditionally, at the moment, everyone thinks that the farmer is going to collect the data in the field and is going to use it wisely. But everybody else who is actually getting more margin than the farmer on every single product is not participating in that and demanding better quality, demanding more efficient operations and logistics. And so this from the outset seems crazy. And we hope to change that by providing value essentially from that data to everybody, and therefore being able to reduce the cost of the essential infrastructure that the whole industry is responsible for, rather than just one participant.
Yeah. Well, as an ex-farmer, I'm slightly biased on the argument when it comes to margins and who should pay for what. But maybe
biased on my side.
Yeah. That's a whole conversation that could take an afternoon. But swinging now, because I want to make sure that we cover a few topics here during the panel. So if we're swinging all the way from the farmer to the consumer, which are on opposite ends of this cycle, ultimately, to some extent. Markus, you mentioned about Miils, and you've got this nutrition algorithm that nudges us towards healthy decisions. I already mentioned about the fact that e-commerce, this was in the previous presentation, has almost doubled as a segment in the last 8 weeks. How are you seeing that on the retail side? What are the learnings that you have, and how's it impacted your business going forwards?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting thing, because the COVID-19 is a very negative thing for the world in general. I would say, of course, we all know that, and it has an impact for everything we do. But for online sales of food, the impact has been tremendous. It's in countries like Germany, which is known to be quite conservative and slow moving when it comes to adopting new technologies. The online food sales grew by 126% in April this year compared to the April last year. And this kind of growth is something that was estimated to happen after years, like after several years. In our plans we had it there as a dream amount of food sold online for 2024 or 2025. And now in 2020 we are there, and we reached it in few months. And this is, of course, also good news for all the technologies that are part of the online food sales, like our solution and our technology. So it's we see a very big change happening there, and we also see that consumers are doing exactly what we were hoping that they would do. They start comparing these different services, and they start also requiring a certain level of functionalities and you know that the basic online food buying is also developing, because more and more people are using it. So there's a lot of good development going on, and
so 126% jump in 8 weeks.
126.8% to be exact. How
are the retailers facilitating this this massive turnaround in terms of consumer behavior. What's your learnings? Because you work with a couple of retailers, right? So
yeah.
How have they changed their plans?
Well, they have. I'll give you an example of a retailer here in the Nordics in Finland where we work with. They took their staff from restaurants, because they own also a bunch of restaurants that were closed because of the virus, and they put these restaurant workers to work on these online food sales and to pick up the orders for customers and package them. And they had to triple the amount of people that they had working there before in question of weeks, and people still had to wait for delivery slots for a really long time. So it's been a really big challenge to be able to answer to the demand, and we can't blame the retailers for this. Nobody was even dreaming about development like this. And now we just see when we look at the what kind of orders people are placing and how much food they're buying, it's like Nikita said before, people are doing it less frequently and they're buying more, and this also reflects the online sales. And what is happening is that we see that people are really doing this frequently. The amount of repeated customers is also tripled with the certain retailers that we work with. So we hope that this trend will now continue. People have seen that this is a very good way to buy the basic food that we need every day, and after this situation becomes normal, so most probably numbers will go down, but how much, that's still very questionable. And we believe that there is this trend. People have now found online buying the same way as they did find the way to buy travel online 10-15 years ago. So we are really here seeing something totally new.
Slowly and then suddenly. That's how it quite often comes, isn't it?
Yeah. But this has been so sudden that somebody had said this, let's say half a year ago, that in 2020 there will be 127% increase in the online food sales in Germany. People would have laughed at him and said that, come on, I mean, that's totally impossible. I mean, why would that happen? It's like, yeah.
Right, we have 5 minutes, and before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we honor the singular comment question in the chat, which I'm very grateful to Blas for posting. It relates to, I'll read it out so that everybody gets it. Hi guys, how do you see smaller hydro aquaponics farms, pods, as opposed to the traditional large-scale farming for producing leafy greens for everyday consumers, schools, etc.? Now, I used to be an aquaponic vertical farmer, so I'm going to hold off answering this for now because I'm out of touch. This was a number of years ago, and anybody jump in, but I've got a feeling that Ali might have an opinion about this because you guys are in farm and it's part of your investment thesis, right? So who's got some opinions on this question?
Oh, opinion.
I mean, frankly, I'm going to look at Sorosh.
I have opinions on many things. I can give my short answer, and then I'm sure someone knows more. I mean, I would just say I don't see it as a big solution to the our world problems. I would say I think it might be an interesting. I think customers like fresh fresh herbs and leafy greens. It's delicious, and it's something we're willing to pay quite a lot for. It doesn't require a lot of energy and to grow. So I think that's where this kind of vertical farming works. And I think, but I don't know, beyond that, I'm personally not very excited about it. I think if you're in Dubai, probably you should be very excited about it, and some other places. But
yeah,
but in
I don't know. If I could weigh in, I would. I'm also more excited about soil regeneration and in the end field farming due to its sustainability element and kind of impact on the environment as opposed to small pods. But it's fun.
Speaking as somebody who's set up and run vertical farms, albeit ahead of the curve, so we made all of the first mover disadvantage mistakes. the conversation has to come back to COGS. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback on my computer for some reason. It needs to come back to COGS again because, you know, from a nutritional perspective, yes, it's great to be closer to leafy green. You manage to keep the nutritional content better. From a transparency perspective, it's fantastic because the consumers can see and touch and feel what they're picking and see the product and come closer to the food itself. But the industry is set up for efficiency and low cost, which means that you're always going to be competing on price in the retail. And that's what ultimately really beat us over the head every single time, was that you need to be able to have scale in order to produce in quantity and also quality, I have to say, because there's also a technical element to this about climate sandwiching. And what happens when you start to sandwich climate multiple times is that it just becomes more and more times more technical as to how to produce a standard quality product. So I tend to agree with Sorosh. I think the idea of having large desert farms in arid areas is fantastic because you can harvest the sun as energy and translate that into a relatively low-tech production. But otherwise, I feel that a lot of it is still on the marketing scale of the innovation as opposed to the systematic shift scale of innovation. Sorry, Infarm and Ali, that's not a direct dig towards you guys. Anybody disagree? You can challenge me. It's more interesting.
I think it's circumstantial, right? I mean,
I just think that the resilience.
Oh,
go ahead, Philip. Okay, mine's
please,
literally 2 seconds. Okay, I was simply going to say situational in the sense that, you know, I think there are two main arguments. One is the freshness point of where there is that much to gain by virtue of having a super short localized supply chain because nutritional density collapses on that given varietal, like leafy greens and herbs, and you can weigh out the cost of energy to the production, then you have a viable argument. Or obviously food security, where you do not have arable land to the desert point. And we see that, right? There's massive investment from that part of the world in this kind of technology.
Definitely. Philipp, do you want to make your point too?
I just think the discussion in general, not only in terms of aquaponics, but in general also when it comes to cultivated meat, will be a very interesting one, whether we're going to have very centralized large-scale production or decentralized smaller scale production or mid-scale production. And I think that's not at all clear at this point. It's very much going to depend on how the industry plays out, who are the big players entering the industry and so on. But from a resilience point of view, of course, it's going to make a lot of sense to have smaller decentralized production systems. But that's going to be a very, very interesting thing to see in the future.
Agree entirely. And if anybody wants to have a case study on what that might look like, then the Netherlands as a country is a very interesting one to look at, where we've got horticultural industry on the outskirts of cities, which is pretty productive. I'm conscious of time.
Mark, if I can hop in for a second.
Yeah, go ahead, Alain. You've got 30 seconds.
I just wanted to say, I think there's solutions that are personal solutions. If you are in an island and you're just, this is your own consumption and your own production, then you care a lot less about the price. But if you want to build an industry, if you want to actually supply cities and you want to actually make an impact on the environment and really upend or change these industries, then it has to be done at scale, and it has to be done with the correct price, or what Ali was saying before about the cost of the protein, or in our jargon FCR, the food conversion ratio. Is what was done before, like Sorosh was speaking about, like 8-for-1 for the beef industry. You're not doing something right. If you do it very, very expensive, customers aren't going to go for that either. So I think the way to go is if you can find something that can actually scale, and that can be price competitive, and if it's better for the environment, then go for it. And it's sometimes possible to find all three. And I'm certainly not going to toot Ynsect horn, but that's what I'm here for. You look at every indicator and you're thinking, wow, in terms of FCR, I'm probably the best, natural animal protein, FCR out there. And if you look at the impact on the environment, if you look at the scale and the size, you can do this. And there are some other, companies that can do this, like, for example, Sorosh, and his cheese company. I mean, there is nothing that actually prevents him from being competitive, and actually do great for the environment. So, there's a lot of considerations, but scale is a big one. Are you going to really impact your industry, or are you going to do some cool, thing, but that could work if you were just alone in an island and very.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point to end on, actually, which is that there is huge opportunity out there within the agri-food industry. There's masses of opportunity to improve in terms of sustainability, but there's also the reality of the industry that we work in, which is that you require scale to be able to be price competitive. And that's from hundreds of years of innovating purely based on reduction of cost or improvement of efficiency, I think. I had hoped to do a little bit of a wrap up, but I see that the time's over and people are moving on to the next session. So I'd just like to take a moment to thank everybody for joining on the session today. I really appreciate the panelists for taking time out of their really busy schedules. For the viewers watching just now, there's agri-food tech as a theme. It's not like we've got a lot of exits to point at here to bring confidence about what we're doing. This is really coming from the heart from these people, and they really see an opportunity and also a better future for how we're going to produce and distribute food going forwards. So I think a big virtual round of applause for our panelists who are trailblazers in terms of setting the direction for this industry. And I'm looking forward to what's to come in the future. Thank you guys very much.